All right. Hey, folks, it's Faz from Faz Lifts. Today, we're going to talk about how much muscle you can gain over a training lifetime. So, this discussion was kind of brought on by a post that I made on Instagram, which was a little bit cheeky, a little bit provocative, and let me know what you think of it anyway. But this is what it was. So, I posted this up. As standards continue to improve, it is becoming increasingly evident there never was a natty limit. So clearly that's quite a strong stance to take, and it was designed to be a little bit provocative, but it's one of those things that gets people talking. It's what Instagram is for. You can give it a bit of information, get a bit of trolling, then I can go back to YouTube and I can be educational. So it's a bit of fun. So anyway, what we're going to talk about is how much can you gain, and I'm going to talk you through the course of a lifetime of training, and also what are the factors that influence how much you can gain, and hopefully give you guys a practical insight in what you can apply like right here and now and gain from that. So firstly, what are the factors involved in how much you can gain? Firstly, are you doing what it takes? And if we just pause here for a second and just remember Big Rich up there in that big gym in the sky. Okay, moving on. So on a serious note, factors which influence gains. So these are just general factors which influence gains. So these apply right through your training career, your training lifetime. So I want to rattle these off first, then we'll go through different phases of training. So firstly, it's diet. I mean, diet's the big thing. It's a huge thing. If you're not actually gaining scale weight, you can't possibly hope to gain significant muscle size. It's a big thing. It's a huge thing. I know I've discussed recomposition in the past, and I've talked you through how you could do it if you wanted to go down that road, but it's not the preferred route for the majority of people. There are particular circumstances where it might be more appropriate, but for most people, it's not the way forward. So to significantly gain muscle size, it works in your favor to actually get the scale moving. It helps. So specific bulking cutting phases throughout the year generally help a lot. Next factor, which is mostly out of your control, is genetics. Now, genetics is an interesting one. Genetics typically is thought of as how fast you make progress. But there are different sides to genetics as well. It's also a case of how far you can go. Now, like I've seen in my own training, I had growth spurts round about sort of first 2 years were very, very fast growth for me. Then years 5 and 6, when I had reached sort of advanced stage, then again, I had another growth phase about sort of 12 years in. So I saw in my own life, gains for me weren't spectacular, really, in the grand scheme of things, but they seem to keep coming for a long time. So I think there's a difference here in terms of how fast you gain, but also how far you go. And I think they're separate things. I think if you've not gained, say if you and your mate have started lifting and within 3 years, he's gained a lot more than you, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's always going to be further ahead and you should just give up. There's a definite difference there from what I've seen. I mean, looking back now over 20 years, I can say this. There are people who gain slow, but just gain consistently and just keep gaining. So they'll just keep gaining for like 20 years. It's different. And also it affects people in terms of where they start. So that's another thing which affects people, like where do you actually start? Like, do you start with a large degree of muscle? Do you start with less? I mean, I was probably closer to starting at about 130, 140 pounds originally, which means at my peak, I've probably gained 40, 45, 50 pounds of muscle altogether when I was at my largest. So genetics, it's different. There are different aspects of genetics: how far, how fast, where you start, all that stuff. Next thing is consistency. Now, this is definitely mostly under your control. So did you have a lot of time off? I went traveling for about 1.5 years when I was younger, and that pretty much put a stop to a lot of my progress. But fortunately, at that time, I'd already reached, the big 3. So yeah, I went for a period of 18 months. I did some traveling around Asia, and it was a great life experience, fantastic. But it definitely put my training on a hold. My first year of university, for obvious reasons, put training on a hold. I mean, I still trained, but put progress on a hold. Yeah, injuries too. It's a big one. I mean, you guys maybe know that I had the big hamstring tear in 2006. That put me out for a long time. So, yeah, consistency, things which are in your control, things which aren't in your control. These vary as well. Next, things which are under your control, recovery factors. So, how you consistently attend to things like sleep, stress, and other activities which might interfere. Like maybe you're, like I did when I was younger. I did 3 years of Vale Tudo, which is submission wrestling. So at the time, MMA was very much into grappling and stuff. Now I think it's a bit more balanced between striking and grappling. But I really enjoyed it. But it put a dampener on how much competition I could have done in that time. But I mean, it was fine. It was fun. It just ended up I had to give up the MMA because it just got in the way of the powerlifting. Next thing is programming. That's very much in your hands. This can make a big impact at the right time for sure. Like getting somebody who can teach you what to do when you're a beginner makes a huge difference. Like, yes, you can do pretty much whatever you want as a beginner, but if you start on the right foot as a beginner, as I've illustrated in my noob book, it sets you up for better gains down the road, because you're better at doing the form on the important exercises, but you also understand the relationship between food and training. So if you understand those things as a beginner, it makes a big difference moving forward. And then it makes a huge difference as an intermediate, because you have all these ideas and you can implement them properly. And, with all of that, gender plays a role too. I mean, I think with women, with the figures I'm about to outline, I think women would probably gain about half of the muscle mass over the course of a lifetime, maybe more, but roughly half, I'd say. And other memorable mentions are age and PEDs. I think, after a certain point, it does become harder. I'm not certain where that point is from what I've seen, because I work with a range of men and women from 20 to 70. So I don't know at what age people tend to stop gaining as fast, because it's hard to say. I don't know. I guess I'd need more experience to give a definitive answer. But what I will say is, though, guys who are 45, 50, 55, 60, some of them can gain really fast, because oftentimes they have the rest of their lives in order. So I don't necessarily think it's quite as clear-cut as older guy won't make gains. Typically, the older guys tend to have more of their life under control. They're able to prep their food more than the 18-year-old kid who's still living at home. They just have a better handle on things, more resources sometimes, So then obviously PEDs come into play as well. That's under your control too. But in general, that's a list of things which are under your control. So now let's delve into the timeline, I guess. So first, productive year. And note the way I've said that. I've said productive year. For a lot of people, for all of you guys watching this right now, you might not have had your first productive year yet. You might still be angling along. And you might be, 60, 130 pounds, 140 pounds, or you might be 180 pounds and very, very fat, skinny fat, whatever. But anyway, first productive year, I see people gaining anywhere between 5 to 20 pounds on average. I think 10 pounds for most young, healthy male populations is a good average. And I'm going to carry on talking about men, just with the proviso that for women, aim for about half of that. Now, it's usually on this sort of curve, yeah? So you generally tend to have the majority of people, with about 10 pounds, less people 5, more people on the 20 pounds sign. And once you get to the real extreme ends, you get this is where your Jay Cutlers reside, who reportedly gained 50 pounds of muscle in his first year. So a lot of this really depends on how aggressively you attack weight gain and weight on the bar. I think one of the big problems with beginners is they're very, very fat phobic for the most part, because it's not normal, is it really? I mean, really think about it. Like, it's kind of weird, isn't it? Like, you've been going along your life, you're chilling, you've got a bunch of suits that you like going to work, people see you in the same body, and all of a sudden you start this bodybuilding thing, and your boss at work and your girlfriend or your wife and your parents see you gaining like 50 pounds the first year. It's a bit weird, but it does depend how aggressively you attack the weight gain. I mean, if you don't gain weight, then where's the muscle going to come from? It doesn't magically grow out of nowhere. You're not going to be a lean, shredded 180 pounds if you're currently a leanish, skinny, fat 140, like without gaining some weight. Ultimately that's the bottom line, right? So it definitely depends on how aggressively you attack weight gain. And I happen to think for the guys who are quite small, like the guys who are under 100, I don't know, 60 pounds, it just makes sense to gain weight because you have to be very, very lean at a light body weight to actually look lean. When you're bigger, you can be a bit fatter and still look lean because your muscles just kind of push out, So it depends on weight gain. Secondly, it depends on how aggressively you want to add weight to the bar. Now, the example I give is in my first year of lifting, I got up to a 190 kilo deadlift, which is about like 420 pounds, 440 pounds, something like that. But anyway, I didn't really have any limits in terms of what I could do. In my mind, I had lost 50 pounds of body fat the previous year, just doing running and stuff like that. I started lifting weights, gained back 40. And fortunately for me, in my mind, I didn't have a limit. So a large portion of that 40 pounds of muscle, probably half, I gained a butt ton of muscle that year. But it was due to the weight gain, but it was also due to the fact that I just didn't have any fear. I went to a gym with a lot of really strong guys, and 190 kilo deadlift was nothing. There were guys benching that much. There were guys benching 200 kilos. There was a local guy around here, drug-free police officer, actually, was a 300 kilo deadlifter. We had a bunch of strong men, Olympic lifters, powerlifters, bodybuilders, all in the same gym. So my view of standards was massively inflated, which is another one of the reasons why I'm quite happy to talk about standards on YouTube and to set you guys high standards, because it does help mentally to have something there in your mind which says 180 kilo deadlift, not a big deal. Like, you should feel like that. And I think it also depends on kind of what I've said here, understanding the symbiotic relationship between food and training. A lot of times, and I have mentioned this before, and I will do a video on it at some point, but a lot of times when you stall in your training, it's not a problem with the training, it's a problem with your diet. The quickest way to push out of your first stall, and what I recommend for your stall, your first major strength stall in your first year, is actually to gain weight. That's the best way to do it. So you have to understand the relationship between food and strength. It's important throughout your entire training life. It makes a difference. So that's your first productive year. I think 5 to 20 pounds. If you're an absolute stud, it'll be 20 pounds. Most people, it'll be something more like 10 pounds. Some guys, like your absolute genetic beasts, will be gaining like 50 pounds, like Jay Cutler. Okay, next, second and third productive years. So I've written here 0 to 10 pounds. Now 0 because, people just get stuck. After that first decent year of gaining maybe 10 pounds of muscle, people will literally get stuck. Now, they'll get stuck for a variety of reasons. I think the biggest thing is, there's a few biggest things. We'll start with weight gain. I think that's the big one. I've mentioned that already, so I'm not going to talk through that again. But without actually adding muscle size, without adding weight on the scale, how do we expect to add muscle size? And I think the second thing is routine changing. This is a big one. This is a really big one. Routine changing, because at this stage, this is when stuff gets hard. Yeah. And you can't science your way out of this. Like, it's just hard. You have to literally just smile, get under the bar and get it done with. Like, you can't intellectualize your way out of the hard work. Like, it sucks sometimes. I had this conversation with a client recently. Shout out to Alex if he's watching. He got to what was his previous plateau for squats, and he just didn't want to attempt the weight, and so he said to me, everything felt really hard, and I just didn't want to attempt it. And I was like, so I gave him a long talk about the mental side of lifting, because he's genuinely trying. Like, he's monetarily involved. He tries. He's a good lad. He listens. But it got to the session that he just psyched himself out, and I knew that's what it was, because he didn't even attempt the top weight. So I had a talk with him, and he completely understood. He got it, and I get it. Like, I've been there. It does psych you out. So anyway, long story short, he went back to the next session, smashed it, hit an all-time PB for a moderate set of squats, a moderate rep range set of squat. I think it was a set of 8, if I remember right. But the mental side is hard. Like, you've got to really want it. Every guy that you know who has got to a good level of muscle mass without drugs has had to go through these plateaus. Like, you have to mentally tackle them. It makes you better for life, because you do have the mental resolve to tackle these issues. Because yeah, it sucks. No one wants to do 3-plate, 4-plate squats. No one wants to do that stuff. It hurts. I had a conversation with a female client of mine recently. She was she's working with about 60 kilos, and she's ramping up again. And she said to me, because it's a new program, do I have to start at 60? The aim was to go 60, 62, 65, 67 into new poundage territory, right? And she said, oh, I just don't really quite, I feel very weak today. Something feels weak about my back. And I was like, that sounds odd. So anyway, she went down to 50 kilos from 60. And I asked her about it. She said, yeah, it just psyched me out. Just said, I just didn't want to do it. It just felt hard. And I get it. And I get why people want to make up excuses as to why they don't want to attempt those weights. It sucks. A lot of the intermediate, plateau is that it's not attempting weights. If you are consistently attempting weights in a programmed way, not just like a lunatic and trying to max every week, but yeah, a lot of it is the mental side of things. So plateaus here and issues here, all the previous factors apply, all the genetic factors, all the lifestyle factors, the food, all that stuff applies. Hopefully at this stage, you've completed the beginner phase. Now, if you attack these next 2 years, the intermediate phase, with a lot of food, well thought out programming, and with some zeal to actually get through these strength plateaus, you'll do well. This is typically where a coach comes into play, for the knowledge, but also for the accountability. So the knowledge about diet and training, but also the accountability, like I just mentioned with my client Alex, and also this other female client as well. Both of them really hard workers, but the mental side gets to all of us, especially when it's new poundage territory. Like nowadays, I don't have a great deal of mental barriers when I go to the gym because I'm mostly lifting lighter than I was when I was bigger. So nothing really scares me anymore. I mean, what's going to scare me, on a leg press or a squat after squatting 255 a few years ago? It's 10 years ago. So it's the mental side is huge, So yeah, in your second and third productive years, I can see people gaining anywhere between 0 to 10 pounds per year. Okay, on average, about 5 pounds. So far, we're looking at, by the end of the third year, probably about 20 pounds for most young, healthy populations. So moving on. The fourth and fifth-ish year, I would say at this stage, you're looking at another 0 to 5 pounds. I think, 2 or 3 pounds for most young, healthy male populations is a good average. At this stage, training information matters a lot. A lot. I think at this stage, more than any other, training information matters a lot. And being able to individualize your training, not just for yourself, but for individual body parts, is crucial. I mean, I've given the example before. The first plateau that I ever had, the first lift to really struggle was the bench press. Back was pretty good, legs good, deadlift was good, but chest to shoulders really lagged behind. I had to do a ton of volume. So I knew right from the beginning that for me, my MEV, minimum effective volume for chest and shoulders, was super high. Interesting enough, it's not that high anymore because I lift heavier. But certainly when I was coming up, when I was trying to go from that 100 kilo bench to the 140 kilo bench, I needed a hell of a lot of volume to get there. And I think I shared in a previous video, I needed something like 30 sets per week for each of those muscle groups. And that was the only way I could progress. They were hard sets, Yeah, so individualization really matters. And had I not pushed that high, would I have known? No, I wouldn't have. I maybe would have got stuck at 120 kilos, 110. Goes to show, doesn't it? This is why we talk about volume intensity. We try and discuss these topics because they allow us to express a sort of tangible amount that we have worked to express to you guys. Well, actually, I had to do 30 sets per muscle group per week in the chest and shoulders to get me from 100 to 140 in the bench, 2 plates to 3 plates. So I can tell you that, and you can go, whoa, wow, that's an eye opener. I never would have thought anyone would have to go that far, but now you know. I didn't have to do that for my squat and deadlift at all. It was less. Many years later, I did go back up again, and I did. And that eventually got me to my strongest. But certainly to get to those initial numbers of a 4-plate squat, 5-plate deadlift, I didn't need anywhere near as much volume there. It was more an average level of volume, more like 10 sets per week, just hard sets. But yeah, for the bench stuff, I needed a hell of a lot more. So anyway, 4th and 5th year should be another 2 or 3 pounds, putting you up to about anywhere between 22, 23, 24, 25 pounds at this stage for a young, healthy male. Training information matters a lot. Individualization of your whole body, as well as different body parts, matter a ton, as well as everything else we've talked about. So at this stage, your gains should look like this. You should have hit the big strength standard. So if bench, roughly 3 plates, squat 4, deadlift 5, you would have gained some 20 pounds of raw, lean, sexy muscle. Some people would have gained less. Some people would have gained more. Now, if you gain less, odds are you've probably not hit those strength goals. If you've gained more, you've probably exceeded those strength goals. But at this stage, that's roughly where you should be. Okay, after that many years of training, with the consistency, all that stuff in check that I mentioned right at the beginning. Now, at the 6+ years onwards point, so after your first 5 years of training, basically for the rest of your life, you're gaining about anywhere between 0 to 2 pounds per year. Okay. At this point, training is really just something that you do as part of your lifestyle. You do it for other reasons, maybe for mental health, just as part of your life, as in, who you are. You wake up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you go to the gym. It's just who you are. At this point, you are considered to be advanced and you can enjoy the fruits of your efforts. At this point, you might also consider competition. It becomes more attractive. Now, the gains won't ever stop, but they do slow down dramatically. And this was going back to my original tweet that kicked off this video. I don't believe there's a natty limit because the gains don't ever really stop. They just slow down dramatically. So if you are gaining, you cannot say there's a limit. But hopefully at this point, you would have gained some, 25, 30 pounds of lean tissue. I think if you've gained far less than that and you've been training for 6 years, maybe you've gained 15 pounds. That's not so good. It's a bit yikes. If you've gained over 45 pounds, fantastic. So I think, as a rough rule for a guy who's average height, 60 kilos with abs is a little bit yikes. Like they've probably not done much. 70 kilos with abs is pretty decent. 80 kilos with abs is you've done very well. Okay. The guys, and I'm talking not just abs, what I mean by abs is actually stage shape, lean condition. So I hit stage at 80. So, I'm pretty big. So I think if you can say you're about there, then you've done very, very well. A guy can be, 210 with abs and maybe get on stage at 180. So there's definitely a difference. So yeah, not just with abs, but actually maybe stage shape. So yeah, anyway, I think that's roughly where a lot of the top natties are. So a lot of the top natties in the world tend to be at about that level, about 180, 185, maybe possibly 190 with stage shape abs. That's kind of where they are. But yeah, that's the timeline. That is the timeline. So in summary, let's just quickly discuss practical take-home points. Some of the biggest tools you have to help force this progress is well-planned gaining and cutting cycles. It doesn't pay that much just to stay the same weight. Like, I get it, it's appealing, and I know I've discussed it before. I have a video which is very popular telling people how to do it. It's not generally the preferred way of doing things, though. For a reason, you just gain better when you just gain more muscle when you're gaining weight, and you cut more body fat when you're cutting down. So, yeah, I think because of the difficulty associated with gaining muscle, definite gaining cycles tend to work quite well. They tend to work better. I would say either way, you've got to make sure all the rest of the factors are in check. And that's what makes it so hard to compare bulking, cutting versus recompositioning. Because if you are putting more attention into recompositioning, you could do better than somebody who's sloppily bulking, cutting. So there's no hard and fast rule. Because let's face it, once you pass 3, 4, 5 years, you're not gaining much anyway per year. So no matter how much you bulk and cut, you're probably still only gaining 2 or 3 pounds, right? Or 1 or 2 pounds. So you're never gaining that much, but you may need to go down that route to actually see those gains. But again, it depends how well your strategy is planned out. But in general, I'd say gaining and cutting cycles do help. Next thing is well planned out programming. It pays to pay attention to the amount of volume you need, how hard you need to work, how often you need to train, volume, frequency, intensity, golden trio. It pays to pay attention to those things. And I know that for a lot of you, this is going to seem needlessly complicated. You know, just talking about how hard to train, how many sets to do. You want to sort of simplify things into just train hard, brother. Like, I get it. I get the sentiment. I've had people say that to me for 20 years, honestly. Why don't you just, it's not rocket science, Faz. But I'll tell you this, those people never really gain. And I can say that now. Looking back on 20 years, I can say that. Those guys who are on the forums begging for people to dumb things down and talking about how it's not rocket science, those guys who spend that level of mental energy trying to stop everyone else from thinking, they don't gain. Just trust me on that. Like, they don't gain. In fact, no, you don't have to trust me on that. I don't like saying that. I don't like it. I don't like to say just trust me on that. You'll see for yourself. Like I saw the same guys who were saying don't overthink things 20 years ago, they didn't gain anything. Because for any endeavor in life, it's not just work. You have to work intelligently. Third thing is goals, aim high. I've made a few videos now talking about strength answers. I've made some with Steve from Massive Iron, made some by myself. But at every time I get met with, in the comments, at least 1 or 2 people who, it was more in the early days. I get less now. But it's more in the early days who say things like, those standards are too high. What are they? They're too much. They should be less. I'm shorter. Or I'm smaller. It should be less. Like, I already know those people are going nowhere, you know, and it's such a shame. It's such a shame. Next thing is individualization per person and per body parts. As I said, with programming, that helps. The final thing, recovery factors in order. So making sure your sleep, your stress levels, your food is all in check. Right, folks, hopefully that was a interesting video. Mostly informative, somewhat practical. And I will see you in the next one.